Good evening, gays. Tonight, I don't just want to tell you a story. I want to let you in on a secret. A delicious, shimmering secret that history tried very hard to forget. We're going to talk about a man who was so beautiful it was a problem. So openly gay in the 1920s it was a scandal. And so talented he became the muse for an entire revolution. I want to introduce you to Richard Bruce Nugent. And when I say introduce, I mean I want you to see him. Picture this. It's a sweltering summer afternoon in Harlem, and walking down the crowded pavement of 7th Avenue, the stroll is a young man wearing, well, not much. He's barefoot, his trousers are fashionably frayed, and his shirt is open to the navel, revealing the lean, graceful lines of a dancer. He isn't walking, he's gliding. He is a piece of walking, talking art, and he knows that every eye, male and female, is drawn to him like a moth to a fabulous flame. He wasn't just in the Harlem Renaissance. Darling, for a fleeting, glorious moment, he was the Harlem Renaissance. This man, this beautiful enigma, holds the key to understanding how a group of queer, black artists, writers, and blues singers created a world of their own in a country that barely acknowledged their humanity, let alone their genius or their desires. As you settle in tonight, we're going to uncover not just what they did, but the sheer, audacious style with which they did it. We're going to peel back the respectable layers of history to find a smoky, gin-soaked, lavender-scented truth. Before we begin this journey, let us know in the comments where in the world you are listening tonight. Our community spans the globe. And please take a moment to like this video if these stories matter to you and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring these histories to light. Now dim the lights, dim them low, and prepare to discover why a beautiful, barefoot boy changed everything. Chapter 1. The Heart of the Story. Our story truly begins with the Symphony of Arrival. It's the early 1920s, and Harlem is the epicenter of a new world. To understand its magic, you have to feel it. As you're settling in tonight, imagine you're standing on the corner of 135th and Lenox Avenue. Close your eyes. What do you hear? You hear the percussive rhythm of the city, the clatter of the elevated train overhead, the confident click of women's heels on the pavement, the deep rumbling laughter spilling out of a barbershop, and underneath it all, the seductive thrum of a jazz piano from a basement speakeasy. Now what do you smell? The air is a cocktail. There's the sharp mineral scent of coal smoke from the handsome brownstones, a smell of hearth and home, but it's layered with the tantalising aroma of street vendors selling fried fish and hot sweet potatoes, their fragrance mingling with the cheap, sweet perfume worn to be noticed, and the expensive cologne of a numbers runner flashing a roll of bills. This was not just a neighbourhood, it was a destination, a city of refuge, the black capital of the world. It was a place you came to become yourself, and into this vibrant, chaotic, hopeful world steps Richard Bruce Nugent. He arrives from Washington, D.C., a city he found suffocatingly bourgeois. Bruce, as he insisted on being called, was not made for bourgeois. He was made for art, for poetry, for provocation. He was impossibly handsome, with a slender, androgynous grace and large, expressive eyes that seemed to see right through you. He carried himself not with the arrogance of wealth, but with the profound confidence of someone who knows their own beauty, who wears it like a bespoke suit. He was, in his own glorious words, an exotique, and he treated all of Harlem as his personal stage. He quickly found his tribe, the intellectual and artistic elite of this new black Mecca. He met the great poet Langston Hughes, who was instantly mesmerised. Hughes was the thoughtful observer, the man who captured the soul of the people in his verse. Bruce was the soul of the people in motion. He was the poem come to life. They met, as so many did, at one of the legendary parties hosted by the millionaire heiress Alelia Walker, whose lavish salons were the beating heart of Harlem's social life. In a room crowded with literary giants, political activists, and visiting European royalty, Bruce Nugent stood out simply by being. He lived his life as a dare. He would sketch languid, sensual nudes of his friends and lovers on restaurant menus. He would crash parties and hold the entire room captive by reciting decadent French poetry he'd just learned. And he lived openly as a gay man. Now let's be clear, this was not the 21st century. There were no pride parades, no legal protections. The word gay, as we know it, didn't even exist in common parlance. People spoke in codes, using terms like in the life or a member of the brotherhood. But Bruce didn't seem to need codes. His very existence was the message. This radical openness, this performance of self in a world that demanded conformity, was the spark. But Bruce's story, and the story of his entire queer family, gets infinitely more intriguing when we discover the secret world that allowed them to flourish. Chapter 2. The Catalyst and the Context. So how, you might ask, did this queer Garden of Eden manage to bloom in the middle of 1920s America? It wasn't a miracle. It was, my dears, a glorious accident born of hypocrisy, rebellion, and a national thirst for illegal booze. While your eyes grow heavy, let's travel back to the source. The single greatest catalyst for the queer social scene in Harlem was Prohibition. This nationwide ban on alcohol, intended to usher in an era of pious sobriety, instead gifted America the speakeasy. And the speakeasy, by its very nature, was a place outside the law. When everyone is a criminal just for having a drink, a certain kind of social barrier dissolves. In the dimly lit, smoke-filled rooms of Harlem's countless illegal clubs, the old rules simply melted away. These were places of transaction, and the only colour that truly mattered was green. White New Yorkers, bored to tears with their own sanitised society, began flocking uptown on what they called slumming expeditions. They came seeking the primitive, the exotic, the authentic thrill of black jazz and dance. Their presence, while problematic and voyeuristic, brought a river of cash into the neighbourhood. It also provided a strange kind of cover. A club owner, busy bribing the police and managing his bootleg liquor supply, was hardly going to bother himself with who was dancing with whom. This created a unique social laboratory. For queer people, both black and white, these spaces offered a breathtaking degree of freedom. You could see a black man in a sharp tuxedo teaching the Charleston to a white downtown poet. You could see women, who would later be called bulldaggers, dressed in tailored suits and holding hands at a corner table. This was the world that nurtured the Renaissance. It was a world lubricated by gin and defined by the blues. At the more respectable end of the spectrum was the intellectual architect of the movement, Alain Locke. A brilliant, Harvard-educated philosopher, Locke was the man who literally wrote the book on the new Negro. He was also a deeply painfully closeted gay man. He envisioned a renaissance of high art, of black sonnets and symphonies that would prove the intellectual equality of the race. He was, to put it mildly, a bit of a snob. He championed the work of queer poets like Countee Cullen, but he wanted their desires to remain tastefully veiled, hinted at in classical allusions. This created a fabulous tension. On one side, you had Alain Locke's high-minded salons with their delicate teacups and hushed literary debates. On the other, you had the raw, sweaty, visceral world of the buffet flats and speakeasies where people lived the very lives Locke wanted to airbrush. Bruce Nugent and his friends existed in the vibrant space between these two poles. They respected the intellect of the old guard, but their hearts belonged to the rhythm of the night. They understood that true liberation wasn't about being accepted by the white world, it was about creating a world of their own. And that world was about to find its voice, not in a polite salon, but in the joyous chaos of a Saturday night. Chapter 3. The Community Response. In this shimmering, precarious world, queer community wasn't just found, it was built, night after night, with sweat, music, and a defiant sense of joy. The foundational institution of this community, the bedrock of its social life, was the humble rent party. While your mind begins to drift, let's push open the door to a crowded Harlem apartment. The rent is due on Monday, the landlord is a pain, and money is tight. The solution? You throw a party. The sensory overload is immediate and wonderful. The apartment is sweltering, the air a thick gumbo of fried chicken, bathtub gin, and 100 different perfumes and colognes all competing for attention. The furniture has been shoved against the walls, and in the centre of the living room, a man is wrestling a wild, joyful noise from an upright piano. This is stride piano, a style born in Harlem, and it's the engine of the party. It's impossible to stand still. The floorboards are groaning under the weight of dozens of dancing bodies, a joyful, tangled mass of humanity. You pay a quarter for a cup of gin that could strip paint, and you pay a dime to get in the door. By the end of the night, with a bit of luck, the rent is paid. But it was so much more than a fundraiser. As you imagine this scene, look closer. Over in the corner, Langston Hughes is leaning against the wall, his observant eyes taking it all in, a small smile on his face. He's gathering material, soaking up the poetry of everyday life. Near the kitchen, a group of women are laughing, their voices rising above the music. Two of them are holding hands, their fingers interlaced, a small, intimate gesture in the midst of the chaos. And on the makeshift dance floor, men are dancing with men, their movements fluid and free, their laughter open and unashamed. The rent party was a sanctuary. It was a space where the labels of the outside world, straight, gay, black, white, uptown, downtown, became blessedly irrelevant. For a few precious hours, everyone was just family. And then there were the balls. Oh, the balls! If the rent party was the heart of the community, the great drag balls were its glittering, sequined soul. These were not some back alley secret. These were enormous public spectacles, held at venues like the Rockland Palace, drawing crowds of thousands. The annual Hamilton Lodge Ball was the queer social event of the year. The newspapers called it the Faggots Ball, and they meant it as a slur, but the community wore the name like a crown. Picture the scene. The air is electric with anticipation. A master of ceremonies, sharp-tongued and utterly ruthless, is on stage with a microphone. The contestants parade across the stage in costumes of breathtaking imagination and artistry. They are not just men in dresses, they are living fantasies. They are Egyptian queens dripping in gold, French courtesans in towering powdered wigs, mythical creatures born of glitter and dreams. The audience, a mix of the queer community and curious straight onlookers, roars its approval. And the humour, my dears, the wit. This is where the art of reading, that quintessentially queer form of devastating insult, was perfected. Darling, the MC might say to a contestant, that dress is lovely. Did you have to kill a whole sofa to make it? It was a language of survival, a performance of resilience. In a world that rendered them invisible, the drag balls made them gods. But this culture of performance and spectacle was about to take a daring leap, from the stage to the printed page. Chapter 4. The Turning Point and the Revelation. The pulsating, revolutionary energy of the ballrooms and buffet flats was thrilling, but it was also ephemeral, disappearing with the morning sun. A fiercely intelligent and famously difficult writer named Wallace Thurman had an idea. He was tired of the respectable black journals that he felt were pandering to a white audience. He wanted to create a magazine that would capture the raw, uncensored, and often messy reality of the new Negro experience. He wanted to start a fire. He gathered around him a circle of young, brilliant iconoclasts. Langston Hughes, the poet of the people, Zora Neale Hurston, the folklorist with a wicked sense of humour, and of course, the beautiful bohemian Bruce Nugent. They found a rooming house at 267 West 136th Street, a place that became so legendary they gave it a name that was both a joke and a declaration of independence: Niggerati Manor. As you can imagine, this was no stuffy literary salon. It was a chaotic, creative whirlwind. The rooms were filled with overflowing ashtrays, half-empty bottles of gin, and stacks of books and manuscripts. They would stay up all night, fueled by coffee and dreams, arguing passionately about art, socialism, and the meaning of life. It was here, in this crucible of defiant creativity, that they forged their weapon. They would call the magazine Fire, in all caps, with 2 exclamation points, just so you knew they meant business. It was financed, barely, by selling shares to friends and patrons. The vision was clear: to burn down the old timid ideas of what black art should be. They would write about jazz, about poverty, about sex, about colorism within the black community, and yes, about queerness. They were deliberately, joyously poking the bear. When the one and only issue of Fire was published in November 1926, it landed on the Harlem establishment like a bomb, and at its explosive centre was a prose poem by Bruce Nugent titled Smoke, Lilies and Jade. Let's be very clear about what this was. This was the first explicitly queer piece of fiction ever published by an African American writer. The story itself is a beautiful, decadent dream. It follows the languid thoughts of a young artist named Alex as he drifts between his attraction to a man and a woman. It's filled with sensory details, the feeling of cool sheets, the scent of incense, the beauty of a male body. A key line reads, "He knew that he would never love a woman, not as he loved beauty." And for Alex, beauty was a man named Adrian. The reaction was apoplectic. The older guard, the respectable leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois, were utterly horrified. They saw it as a betrayal, a confirmation of the worst stereotypes about black people. They called it filth, pornography, a waste of talent. The magazine was a commercial catastrophe. And then, in a twist of fate so cruelly perfect it feels like fiction, a fire broke out in the basement where the several hundred unsold copies were being stored. Fire was literally consumed by flames. It seemed like a total failure, but it wasn't. A line had been crossed. The secret was out. The love that had been confined to whispers in smoky rooms was now, irrevocably, in print. The ashes of Fire would fertilise the ground for everything that was to come. Chapter 5. The Ripple Effects. While Fire may have gone down in flames, its defiant spirit rose from the ashes and found a new home, the stage. The ripple effects of that singular act of literary rebellion were most profoundly felt in the music that defined the era, particularly in the raw, unapologetic voices of the classic blues singers. While the writers had to be clever with their codes, the blues women could sing the truth with a wink and a growl. Let's talk about the Empress of the Blues, Bessie Smith, a commanding presence with a voice that could break your heart and heal it in the same verse. Bessie was a superstar. She was also notoriously bisexual and threw legendary parties that were known for their wild, sexually uninhibited atmosphere. But the queen of queer blues was arguably Ma Rainey, the mother of the blues. Ma Rainey was a force of nature. She was short and stout, decked out in diamonds and gold teeth, and she commanded the stage with an almost regal authority. She was also openly involved with women. There's a famous story of her being arrested in 1925 for hosting an indecent party at her home, which turned out to be an orgy involving the young women of her chorus line. Bessie Smith, her protege, had to bail her out of jail the next morning. Ma Rainey didn't just live this life, she sang about it. As you rest and listen, hear the lyrics to her 1928 hit, Prove It On Me Blues. She sings, I went out last night with a crowd of my friends. It must have been women, 'cause I don't like no men. It's true, I wear a collar and a tie. Talk to the gals just like any old man. This wasn't a subtle, academic allusion. This was a bold, funny, and utterly fearless declaration broadcast on record players across the country. And then there was Gladys Bentley. Oh, Gladys. If Bruce Nugent was the elegant, androgynous prince of the Renaissance, Gladys Bentley was its butch king. A large, powerfully built woman with a booming baritone voice. Gladys performed in a white top hat, tuxedo, and tails. She was a phenomenal stride pianist, and her act consisted of taking popular songs of the day and rewriting the lyrics to be outrageously, hilariously filthy, and almost always about her love for women. She was a sensation. She headlined at her own club in Harlem and was backed by a chorus line of drag queens. She was one of the highest paid black entertainers of her time, a queer icon hiding in plain sight. These performers took the spirit of fire and gave it a soundtrack. They created a public language for queer desire, a language of humour, pain and resilience. They let the thousands of queer people listening in their homes, in their towns, know that they were not alone. But this golden age, this beautiful, fragile bubble of freedom was about to burst. The stock market crash of 1929 brought the roaring 20s to a screeching halt. The white patrons stopped coming uptown, the money dried up, and with economic hardship came a new wave of social conservatism. The party, it seemed, was over, but the memory of the music and the people who made it would linger on. Chapter 6. The Living Memory. As the last notes of our story begin to fade and the vibrant, ghost-filled streets of 1920s Harlem recede into the soft quiet of the night, it's easy to think of this time as a beautiful, fleeting dream, a party that had to end, a chapter closed. But as our journey concludes tonight, we are reminded of a profound and comforting truth. LGBTQ history is never just about the past. It is a living, breathing entity. It is not a dusty photograph in an album. It is the blood in our veins, the rhythm in our music, and the defiant wit in our language. The story of the queer Harlem Renaissance is not over. In fact, it is the story that allows the rest of our stories to be told. It is the grand, fabulous overture to the opera of modern queer life. To truly understand this, we must first return to the man who was its most elegant embodiment, Richard Bruce Nugent. What becomes of a beautiful boy when the world that celebrated him vanishes? For many years, as America descended into the grey conformity of the Depression and the paranoid chill of the Cold War, Bruce fell into a gentle obscurity. The world, it seemed, was no longer interested in barefoot poets. He continued to create, of course. An artist can no more stop creating than they can stop breathing. But the audience was gone. He worked various jobs. He lived a quiet life, a living ghost of a more colourful age. But the universe, my dears, has a wonderful sense of timing. As you rest here tonight, picture this scene. It's the late 1960s or early 70s. A young, eager academic, perhaps a student activist fired up by the new energy of gay liberation and black power, manages to track down a name he's only seen in a rare, scandalous old magazine called Fire. He finds Bruce Nugent living in a modest apartment in Hoboken, an old man now, but with the same mischievous eyes and the same innate grace, and the stories begin to flow. Imagine in the awe of that young historian, sitting at the feet of a man who didn't just read about queer history, but had casually sketched it on a napkin over lunch with Langston Hughes. Bruce became a bridge. He was a living, breathing refutation of the idea that queer life was invented at Stonewall. He could describe with a wry smile a world of drag balls, rent parties, and open queer affection that existed 50 years before the first brick was thrown. He showed us that our history was not a sudden explosion, but a long, simmering fire. His legacy is the gift of continuity. He reminds us that living your life openly as a piece of art is not an act of vanity, but a profound act of political and spiritual courage. He didn't march, he strolled, and in his elegant barefoot stroll, he paved the way for every one of us who dares to live our truth with style and without apology. But this continuity was not guaranteed. It was a legacy that had to be fought for, and not everyone survived with their spirit intact. We must also remember the heartbreaking story of Gladys Bentley. Her legacy is a different, more cautionary one, but no less important. While Bruce managed to hold on to the core of his identity through his quiet years, Gladys was crushed by the immense pressure of the McCarthy era. This was a time of brutal conformity, of government witch hunts for communists and sexual perverts. The vibrant, tuxedo-clad, piano-playing butch lesbian who had been the toast of New York was now a dangerous liability. Imagine the fear. Imagine the agents in their grey flannel suits, the threat of blacklisting, the public shame. Gladys did what she thought she had to do to survive. She began wearing dresses and pearls. She gave interviews claiming she had been cured of her lesbianism through hormone treatments and marriage to a man. It is one of the great tragedies of our cultural history. Her story is a stark, painful reminder of how fragile our freedoms are and of the immense psychic toll that homophobia has taken on our brightest stars. Her legacy is a solemn vow that we must make to our ancestors to create a world where no artist ever again has to sacrifice their soul for their safety. She reminds us that for every story of triumphant survival like Bruce's, there are countless others of quiet heartbreak and forced compromise. We honour them all by remembering the truth of who they were, not who the world forced them to become. And what of the community they built? What happened to the joyous, chaotic chosen families of the rent parties and the spectacular fantasies of the drag balls? They did not disappear. They did what queer people have always done. They adapted, they went underground, and they waited. The seeds of the culture they created lay dormant for a time, but they never died. They sprouted again, decades later, in the ballrooms of New York, as documented in the film Paris is Burning. The lineage is direct and unbroken. The houses, the mothers, the spectacular categories, the fierce competition, and most importantly the language, it was all born in Harlem. The art of reading, that uniquely queer skill of crafting an insult so witty and well observed becomes a form of high art, was perfected at the Hamilton Lodge Ball. The concept of shade, of speaking a subtle, devastating truth with a smile, was the lingua franca of those crowded speakeasies. When you watch an episode of RuPaul's Drag Race and you hear the queens trade witty barbs or talk about their chosen family, you are witnessing the living, breathing legacy of the queer Harlem Renaissance. It is not an echo, it is the same song, played in a different key. That feeling of chosen family, perhaps the most profound legacy of all, was truly codified during this era. As you drift deeper into sleep, think about what that really means. For so many of us, for so long, the family we were born into was a place of danger, misunderstanding, or rejection. The Harlem Renaissance was a masterclass in building new families based not on blood, but on a shared spirit. Niggerati Manor was a chosen family. The regulars at Gladys Bentley's club were a chosen family. The dancers at the rent parties, moving together as one, were a chosen family. They showed us how to find our people, how to create spaces of safety and celebration in a hostile world. It's a blueprint we still use every day. every time a group of queer friends gathers for a family dinner, every time we support a friend through a breakup or a coming out, we are participating in a tradition that was perfected in those Harlem brownstones. Finally, the legacy is in the art itself. The Renaissance established a powerful precedent that the queer, black experience was a worthy subject for great art. It gave permission for future generations to tell their stories. Without the audacious prose of Bruce Nugent, do we have the searing, brilliant novels of James Baldwin? Without the coded, heartfelt blues of Ma Rainey, do we get the genre-defying genius of an artist like Janelle Monáe? The Renaissance kicked the door open. It declared that our lives, our loves, and our heartbreaks were not shameful secrets to be hidden, but epic stories worthy of being told, sung, and written. It created a canon of its own. So as we leave this story tonight, let's not think of it as a closed chapter. Think of it as an inheritance. The audacity of Bruce Nugent, the resilience of Bessie Smith, the tragedy of Gladys Bentley, the genius of Langston Hughes, it all belongs to us. It is our origin story. It is the proof that we have always been here, creating, loving, and surviving with unparalleled style. The Harlem Renaissance is not a place or a time you can visit on a map. It is a state of mind, a spirit of defiant joy that lives inside of us. It is the beautiful, resilient legacy that stretches through a century of struggle and triumph to find you, here, tonight, resting and at peace. Until our next journey into queer history together, this is the Sleeping Gay, encouraging you to remember that you are part of a beautiful, resilient legacy that stretches back through all of human history. Sweet dreams, beautiful gaze, and may your rest be filled with pride in the remarkable tapestry of LGBTQ history that connects us all. Good night. As we continue our journey into sleep, let's explore together a new bonus story or thoughts read by our guest narrator.
Tonight, we are not just going to tell a story. We are going to walk inside one. I want to take you by the hand and lead you on a gentle journey through the streets of a dream, a place that was, for a fleeting, magical time, the queer capital of the world. We are going for a walk through Harlem in the heart of the 1920s. There will be no rush. Our pace will be slow, contemplative. We will let the sounds and sights of the past wash over us, guiding us gently toward rest. We will walk in the imagined footsteps of the beautiful rebels we've spoken of before, feeling the city as they felt it, and letting its vibrant ghosts whisper their secrets to us as we drift off to sleep. This is not a history lesson, it is a meditation. A sound walk through a beautiful, resilient memory. If you haven't already, please take a moment to like this video if you believe in the power of memory, and subscribe to the channel. Your support is the light that guides our path. Now find a comfortable position, close your eyes, and prepare to step out of your world and into theirs. Our journey begins, as so many did, underground. Feel the gentle rocking motion, the rhythmic clatter of steel wheels on steel tracks. We are on the new IND 8th Avenue line, the iron artery that pumped a new generation of dreamers into the heart of Harlem. The air in the subway car is thick with the scent of damp wool coats, cheap perfume, and the faint, metallic tang of the electrified third rail. As you settle deeper into comfort, imagine the faces around you illuminated by the flickering, bare light bulbs overhead. Young men and women fresh from the south, their eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and a fierce, burning hope. They are arriving. They are coming home to a place they have never been. The train slows, its brakes groaning a long, mournful sigh. The conductor's voice, muffled and distant, calls out, 135th Street. The doors slide open with a hiss and we step out, not into the frantic rush of modern New York, but into the warm, electric embrace of a Harlem evening. The first thing you notice is the air. It's cooler than the subway, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor's cart and the promise of rain. Feel the solid ground beneath your feet as we ascend the stairs to the street. The sounds of the city grow louder with each step, not the angry blare of car horns, but a richer, more human symphony. We emerge onto the corner of 135th Street and St. Nicholas Avenue. Dusk is settling, and the sky above is a soft, bruised purple, the color of a fading iris. The streetlights are beginning to hum to life, casting long, dancing shadows on the pavement. Look at the buildings. These are not towering glass skyscrapers, but handsome four-story brownstones, their sandstone facades glowing warmly in the twilight. Notice the details. The ornate wrought iron railings, the gentle curve of a bow window, the soft glow of a single lamp in a third-floor room, suggesting a life, a story unfolding within. Let's begin our walk. Our pace is unhurried. We are not going to any particular destination just yet. We are simply absorbing the feeling of the street. We turn on to 7th Avenue, the legendary Grand Boulevard of Harlem, known to everyone simply as The Stroll. And it is a performance. Everyone is out tonight. The day's work is done and the avenue has become a vast, open-air drawing room. Imagine the people we pass. Dapper men in sharply tailored suits and high-collared shirts, their shoes shined to a mirror finish. They tip their hats to women walking in pairs, their cloche hats pulled low, their laughter like music on the evening air. These are the new Negroes Alain Locke wrote of, proud, self-aware, and impeccably dressed. But look closer. In this river of humanity, there are other currents. We are, after all, walking with our queer ancestors. So let's see the street through their eyes. Notice the way two men walking together might let their hands brush for just a moment longer than necessary. See the subtle, appraising glance shared between two women as they pass. These are the codes, the silent language of a community that existed just beneath the surface of respectability. It is a language of glances, of gestures, of a shared, unspoken understanding. And then we see him. Or at least, we imagine we do. Leaning against a lamppost, watching the parade go by, is a young man. He is slender, graceful, and utterly magnetic. It's our Richard Bruce Nugent. He's not dressed like the others. His shirt is unbuttoned a little too low. His hair is a little too wild. There's an amused, knowing smile playing on his lips. He is not just watching the performance of the stroll. He is an active participant, a piece of living art designed to be seen. He catches our eye for a moment, and in that imagined glance there is a spark of recognition, an invitation. He is one of us. He turns and begins to walk, and we follow, letting his phantom figure be our guide, leading us deeper into the intellectual and creative heart of his world. The air grows cooler, and the scent of old paper and new ideas seems to drift from the buildings ahead. Our gentle walk continues, following the ghost of Bruce Nugent away from the main thoroughfare of 7th Avenue. We turn on to 135th Street, and the atmosphere begins to shift. The vibrant social energy of the stroll gives way to something more focused, more contemplative. We are now entering the institutional and intellectual heart of the Harlem Renaissance. The sounds of jazz and laughter are replaced by the murmur of conversation and the rustle of turning pages. Directly ahead of us stands a handsome, imposing building of brick and limestone. This is the 135th Street branch of the New York Public Library. To us it's a library, but to the people of this time it was a palace, a sanctuary. For so many who had come from places where they were forbidden to read, where their education was deliberately stunted, this building was a profound symbol of freedom. Let's pause our walk for a moment and stand before its steps. Imagine the sheer transformative power of this place. It was here that a generation of Black writers and thinkers found the tools to build a new world. Let's push open the heavy oak doors, the sound echoing in the high-ceilinged entrance hall. The air inside is hushed, filled with that unique, comforting scent of old paper, binding glue, and floor wax. We walk softly across the cool marble floor of the lobby. To our right is the main reading room. Let's stand in the doorway and simply observe. The room is vast, with long, heavy oak tables illuminated by the soft green glow of shaded reading lamps. The room is full. Not with the silent, solitary readers of today, but with a community engaged in the collective act of learning. We see young men and women, their heads bent over books of poetry, history, and philosophy. We can almost hear the silent, feverish consumption of ideas. It was in this very room and in the lecture halls in the library's basement that the Harlem Renaissance was debated, defined, and codified. We can imagine a young Langston Hughes sitting at one of those tables, not just reading, but watching, observing the way a tired mother gently reads to her child, the way an old man's finger traces the words on a page. He is gathering the details, the human moments that will fuel his poetry. And perhaps at another table sits Wallace Thurman, his brow furrowed in concentration, not reading the classics but devouring the avant-garde, the forbidden literature, formulating the arguments that will eventually lead to the explosive creation of fire. And what of our guide, Bruce Nugent? It's hard to picture him sitting still for long in such a formal place. Perhaps he is not inside, but waiting on the steps, sketching the faces of the people coming and going, capturing their character in a few swift, elegant lines. He is an artist of life, of movement, and his classroom is the street. Let's continue our walk, leaving the quiet sanctuary of the library behind. We stroll down the block, which was known unofficially as Jungle Alley. This was Harlem's theatre district, the Grand Lafayette Theatre, the Lincoln Theatre. Tonight, their marquees are blazing with light, announcing the latest revues and vaudeville shows. The air here is electric with the thrill of performance. We can hear the faint, muffled sound of a brass band from inside one of the theatres, a wave of applause and laughter from another. This street represents the other side of the intellectual coin. While the library was the home of the written word, the theatres were the home of the spoken word, the sung note, the danced step. It was here that the theories of the new Negro were put into practice on stage for everyone to see, and it was a complicated space. Many of these shows were designed to appeal to the white downtown audiences, full of the very stereotypes the Renaissance leaders were trying to escape. Yet they were also a vital source of employment and a showcase for breathtaking black talent. As we walk, we can imagine Alain Locke, the refined, Harvard-educated philosopher, strolling down this very block. He is pleased by the intellectual energy emanating from the library, but perhaps a little distressed by the raucous, popular energy of the theatres. He is the man trying to conduct this grand symphony to keep it all respectable and high-minded. But as we know, the most beautiful music, the most interesting art, was often happening in the places he was afraid to look. It was happening in the homes, in the private spaces, where the community could finally let its hair down. Our guide, Bruce, seems to sense this. He gives a last wry look at the blazing marquees and turns down a quieter, residential side street, leading us toward the true heart of the community, the home. Our walk takes us away from the grand public stages and into the intimate, private world of Harlem's residential streets. We find ourselves on a block lined with an elegant, unbroken chain of brownstones. It's later in the evening now, and most of the windows are dark, the people within already lost to sleep. But from one building halfway down the block, light and sound are spilling out onto the street. A warm, yellow light glows from the parlor floor windows, and we can hear the relentless, joyful rhythm of a stride piano, punctuated by laughter and the rhythmic stomp of dancing feet. We have arrived at a rent party. Let's not be shy. The door is propped open to welcome the breeze and to welcome us. We step across the threshold, and the sensory experience is immediate and overwhelming. The apartment is hot and crowded, the air a thick, delicious gumbo of smells. Frying chicken from the kitchen, the sharp, botanical scent of bathtub gin being poured into teacups, and the mingled perfumes and sweat of 100 dancing bodies. The furniture has been pushed against the walls, creating a makeshift dance floor in the center of the living room, a space so packed with people it seems to breathe as one. This is not a performance for outsiders. This is the community in its purest form, a chosen family coming together to support one of its own. As your mind settles and your body relaxes, let your senses explore this space. Feel the vibration of the floorboards under your feet, humming with the energy of the piano and the dancers. See the way the low, warm light catches the sheen on a woman's beaded dress, the glint of a man's gold tooth as he laughs. This is a place of profound, life-affirming joy. Let's look for our friends. Over by the makeshift bar in the kitchen, we see Langston Hughes, not dancing, but observing, always observing. He's talking to the host, a woman whose tired eyes still sparkle with warmth and gratitude. He's listening to her story, absorbing the details of her life, the poetry of her struggle. And on the dance floor, lost in the music, we see couples of every configuration. Men dancing with women, women dancing with women, men dancing with men. Here, in the safety of these four walls, the rigid rules of the outside world have been suspended. The only rule is the rhythm. The only commandment is joy. This is the sanctuary, the place where the queer members of the Renaissance could shed the protective layers they wore on the street. Here, they were not a curiosity or a scandal, they were just part of the family. The rent party was the great social equalizer. A university professor could be dancing next to a domestic worker, a famous poet next to a newly arrived migrant. It was a perfect, fleeting democracy, all for the price of a quarter. But there was another kind of sanctuary, a more exclusive, more rebellious one. Let's leave the warmth of the party and walk a few more blocks to a conceptual space, a place that lived more in spirit than in any one physical location. Let's walk to Nigarati Manor. We imagine it as a rooming house on West 136th Street. We climb the stairs to the top floor. The door is ajar. We peek inside. This room is the polar opposite of the neat, orderly library. It is a beautiful, chaotic mess. Books are piled in every corner, overflowing from the shelves. An easel in the corner holds an unfinished sensual charcoal sketch, perhaps one of Bruce Nugent's. The air smells of stale cigarette smoke, cheap wine, and the electric, metallic scent of a hot typewriter. This is the headquarters of the rebellion. We can almost see them, caught in a freeze frame of creative ferment. Wallace Thurman is pacing the floor, a cigarette dangling from his lips, arguing passionately about literary modernism. Zora Neale Hurston is perched on the arm of a tattered sofa, laughing, her voice rich and full of mischief, telling a wild, bawdy story she collected in the rural South. And there, curled up in a worn armchair, is our guide, Bruce, not speaking, but listening, a sketchbook open on his lap, his pencil moving with a life of its own. This room is the birthplace of fire. It is a sanctuary not of community in the broad sense, but of a specific, artistic tribe. Here they were free to be difficult, to be radical, to be scandalous. They were forging a new language, one that would honor the raw, uncensored truth of their lives, including their queer desires. It was a place of immense intellectual courage. As we back away from the door, leaving them to their brilliant arguments, we feel the energy of that courage. It's the energy that will fuel the next phase of our journey as we leave the private homes and descend into the nocturnal, music-filled world of the speakeasy. The night is still young, and the sound of a lone saxophone is calling to us from a basement down the street. The energy of the city changes as we move deeper into the night. The residential streets grow quiet, and the main avenues, which were once filled with the respectable evening strollers, are now punctuated by pools of light from the doorways of clubs and bars. The air itself seems to be humming with a new kind of rhythm, a syncopated, seductive beat that draws you forward. We are now entering the domain of the speakeasy, the kingdom of jazz, the true nocturnal heart of the Harlem Renaissance. Our guide, the ever-elegant ghost of Bruce Nugent, leads us to a nondescript brownstone. There are no blazing signs here, no indication of the world that lies within. Just a single, bare bulb burning over a basement-level door. A large, imposing man stands before it, his arms crossed. A quiet word is exchanged, a secret knock, and the door swings open, releasing a wave of heat, noise, and music that washes over us. We descend a narrow, rickety staircase into the belly of the beast. As your body sinks deeper into relaxation, let your mind build this room. The ceiling is low, so low you can feel the vibrations from the dance floor above in your bones. The air is a thick, blue-grey fog of cigarette and cigar smoke, so dense that the lights from the stage are soft, hazy halos. The smell is intoxicating and raw: stale beer, spilled gin, cheap perfume, and the salty, human scent of sweat. The room is packed, a chaotic, joyful crush of bodies. This is not the polite intellectual world of the library, nor the warm communal embrace of the rent party. This is something wilder, more dangerous, and infinitely more thrilling. Find a small table in a dark corner and let's watch the show. The clientele is a perfect cross-section of the jazz age. We see black intellectuals and artists, the very people we saw at the library, but their collars are loosened now, their laughter louder. We see white downtowners, the slumming parties, their faces a mixture of shock and delight. And we see the queer family in all its glory. They are more visible here than anywhere else. A table of men, their suits impeccably tailored, their hands gesturing with a theatrical flair. A group of women, their hair cut short like a man's, one of them wearing a sharp tuxedo, her arm draped possessively over the back of her girlfriend's chair. In the illicit democracy of the speakeasy, they are safe. But the true focus, the sun around which this entire universe orbits, is the stage. A small 5-piece band is playing a relentless, driving rhythm, a sound so infectious it seems to bypass the ears and go straight to the soul. And at the piano, commanding the entire room with nothing but her voice and her 10 fingers, is a legend. Let's imagine it is the one and only Gladys Bentley. She is a vision. A large, powerful woman dressed in a pristine white top hat and tails. She is not sitting at the piano. She is presiding over it, her hands flying across the keys with a force and precision that is breathtaking. And then she sings. Her voice is not a sweet, delicate thing. It is a deep, powerful baritone, full of gravel and humor and heartbreak. She's singing a popular love song, but she has, with a devilish grin, changed all the pronouns. The song is no longer about a man loving a woman, It is about Gladys and her insatiable love for the ladies. The crowd, straight and queer alike, roars with laughter and applause. They are not just being entertained, they are being given permission to be free. Gladys is the high priestess of this nocturnal church, and her sermon is one of joy, desire, and a complete, glorious lack of shame. We stay for a while, letting the music seep into our very being. The rhythms are hypnotic, the melodies weaving a complex, beautiful tapestry. This is the soundtrack of the Renaissance. It is the sound of a people inventing a new language for themselves, a language of improvisation, of call and response, of sorrow and defiant celebration. As we watch Gladys hold her audience in the palm of her hand, we understand that this music is more than entertainment. It is a form of survival, a way of taking all the pain and prejudice of the outside world and transforming it into something beautiful, something powerful, something that makes you want to dance until dawn. Eventually, though, even this electrifying energy begins to feel too small for the night. There is one last stop on our nocturnal pilgrimage, one final spectacular celebration to witness. We pay our tab, nod to the bouncer, and ascend the stairs, back into the cool night air. The music from the speakeasy fades behind us, replaced by a new sound, a growing buzz of excitement from further up the avenue. The night is about to reach its glittering, fabulous climax. We leave the smoky intimacy of the speakeasy behind and continue our walk. The streets are darker now, in the deep heart of the night, but ahead of us, a brilliant pool of light beckons. The source is a massive building, a public dance hall called the Rockland Palace. On most nights, it hosts big band concerts and dance marathons. But tonight is not most nights. Tonight, it is the home of the Hamilton Lodge Ball, the single most spectacular, most anticipated, and most brazenly queer event of the year. The energy on the street outside is electric. A fleet of taxicabs is disgorging passengers onto the pavement. The crowd milling by the entrance is a dazzling, chaotic mix of Harlem society, downtown bohemians, curious tourists, and the queer community dressed in its absolute finest. The air crackles with anticipation, the sound of 1,000 excited conversations blending into a single, joyous roar. Let's join the queue and make our way inside. As we step through the doors, the sheer scale and spectacle of the event is almost overwhelming. The dance hall is colossal, a vast cavernous space with a polished wooden floor and a balcony circling the upper level. And it is packed. Thousands of people are crammed inside, their faces turned toward the large stage at the far end of the room. The air is hot and thick with the scent of perfume, powder, and gin. As your mind drifts and your body relaxes, let it fill with the sheer, unapologetic fabulousness of this scene. This is not a hidden, secret gathering. This is a public declaration. For one night a year, the queer underground rises to the surface and puts on a show for the entire city, and the city comes to watch, mesmerized. Find a spot near the edge of the dance floor, and let's observe the pageantry. The main event is the costume competition, and it is a sight to behold. A master of ceremonies, a man with a tongue as sharp as a razor and a wit as dry as a martini, is on stage, introducing the contestants. And they are breathtaking. These are not simply men in dresses, these are works of art, living sculptures of pure imagination. Watch as they parade across the stage. Here comes a contestant dressed as an Egyptian queen, her gown a cascade of gold lame and beads, a towering headdress of peacock feathers swaying with every step. The crowd roars. She is followed by another, dressed as a decadent French aristocrat, his face powdered white, a beauty mark perfectly placed on his cheek, a wig of powdered curls piled high on his head. He curtsies to the judges with a look of magnificent disdain. And on it goes. There are Spanish matadors, futuristic space queens in silver, mythical creatures dripping with rhinestones and glitter. Each costume is more elaborate, more fantastical than the last. It is a riot of color, of texture, of pure, unadulterated creative expression. And the humor. This is the crucible where the art of the reed is forged into a weapon of mass delight. The MC spares no one. "Darling," he might croon to one contestant, "that gown is a triumph. I see you've skinned every flamingo in Florida to make it." The crowd howls with laughter. It is a language of insiders, a performance of intelligence and resilience. To be read, to be the subject of such a perfect, witty insult, is almost a badge of honor. Look around at the audience. We see our friends. Langston Hughes is here, of course, leaning against a pillar, a small, appreciative smile on his face as he takes in the spectacle. Wallace Thurman is here, a look of intellectual curiosity mixed with amusement in his eyes. And Bruce Nugent. Bruce is in his element. He's not a spectator, he's part of the art. He's gliding through the crowd, his own outfit a masterpiece of bohemian simplicity, a living contrast to the elaborate fantasies on stage. He is talking, laughing, absorbing the energy of the room, which feels like it could lift the roof off the building. This is more than a party. It is a ritual. It is a moment of profound visibility in a world that works tirelessly to render these people invisible. For this one night, they are not just accepted, they are celebrated. They are royalty. They are the stars around which the entire city seems to revolve. As we stand here, surrounded by the music, the laughter, and the sheer, overwhelming glamour of it all, we feel the immense, life-giving power of a community that refuses to be denied its own beauty. It is the absolute pinnacle of the night, a memory so bright and dazzling it will light our way as we begin our final, quiet walk home. The last prize has been awarded. The final cheer has echoed through the vast hall of the Rockland Palace. The magical, glittering bubble of the Hamilton Lodge Ball has burst, and its occupants are now spilling back out into the cool, pre-dawn air. The night is over. A new day is beginning. It is time for our walk to come to an end. We leave the thinning crowds behind and turn onto a quiet, empty side street. The city feels completely different now. The electric energy of the evening has dissipated, leaving behind a profound sense of peace and stillness. The sky to the east is no longer black, but a soft, deep grey, the first hint of sunrise. The air is cool and clean on your skin, and our footsteps echo softly on the empty pavement. This is the moment of quiet reflection after the glorious chaos. As you settle into the final stages of your journey to sleep, let this sense of calm wash over you completely. Our pace is slower than ever now. We are in no rush. We are simply walking, breathing in the quiet of the city as it sleeps. Look at the brownstones now. They seem softer in this gentle light, their windows like closed eyes. The whole world seems to be holding its breath, resting after the grand performance of the night. The only other person on the street is a milkman, his truck rattling softly, the glass bottles clinking together like a gentle wind chime. He nods to us as he passes, a simple, human gesture that connects the magic of the night to the ordinary rhythm of the day. The world is waking up, and our dream walk must soon end. Let's think about our guides, our phantom companions on this journey. Where are they now? Perhaps up ahead we see two figures walking together, their shoulders occasionally brushing. It's Langston and Bruce. They are not talking. The night has been filled with enough words, enough noise. Now is a time for comfortable silence. They are walking home, their minds filled with the images and sounds of the night, the poems, the arguments, the music, the sheer spectacle of it all. They are carrying the raw material that they will, in the light of day, spin into art. They are carrying the memory of their community's beautiful, defiant joy. We watch them until they turn a corner and disappear, their ghosts fading with the last of the shadows. Our walk has shown us a complete world. We started on the stroll with its public performance of identity. We visited the library, the hallowed hall of ideas. We felt the warmth of the rent party, the heart of the chosen family. We descended into the raw, musical soul of the speakeasy, and we witnessed the dazzling, fabulous climax at the drag ball. We have seen that this was not just a historical movement, it was a living, breathing community full of complex, brilliant and brave human beings. They showed us that even in a world that gave them so little, they could create everything they needed: their own art, their own music, their own families, their own beauty. They built a sanctuary of the spirit, a movable feast of queer identity that they could carry with them wherever they went. Our walk ends here, on a quiet corner, as the first pale rays of sunlight begin to touch the rooftops. The dream is fading, but the feeling remains. A feeling of connection, of gratitude, of pride. The world they built may be gone, but its spirit, its legacy, is an inheritance that lives within every one of us. It is the quiet courage that allows us to be ourselves. As our journey through this night in Harlem concludes, we are reminded that history is not just in books. It is in the air, in the stones, in the memory of a song. It is a dream from which we can draw strength and inspiration. Voices from the archives, a queer Harlem Renaissance. Sleep Story. Our journey now takes us somewhere different. Not to the bustling streets of a city, but to a place of profound quiet, a place of memory. I want you to imagine a room late at night. A small, warm pool of light from a single desk lamp illuminates a heavy wooden table. The air is still and smells of old paper, of leather, of time itself. We are in the archives, a sanctuary where the past is not dead, but merely sleeping, waiting for a gentle hand to open its pages and a soft voice to give it breath once more. Tonight, we are not here to learn facts or dates. We are here to listen to the whispers, the private thoughts, the secret heartbeats of the beautiful rebels who built a world of their own. We will hold their letters, their diaries, and their poems in our hands, and we will let their voices speak directly to us across the decades. There will be no chapters, no interruptions, just a gentle, continuous flow of words and feelings, a river of memory to carry you into a deep and peaceful rest. Settle in. Let the noise of your world fade away. There is nothing for you to do but breathe and listen to the voices from the archives. Our first voice is one of hope. It is the voice of a young man who saw music and beauty everywhere, even in the most ordinary of places. This is Langston Hughes, and he is listening to a jukebox in a small Harlem bar, thinking of someone he loves. Reading of Jukebox Love Song by Langston Hughes. I could take the Harlem night and wrap around you, take the neon lights and make a crown, take the Lenox Avenue buses, trolleys, subways, and for your love song tone there rumble down, take Harlem's heartbeat, make a drum beat, put it on a record, let it whirl, and while we listen to it play, dance with you till day. Dance with you, my sweet brown Harlem girl. The city was a symphony for him, a living, breathing poem, and he was not its only observer. So many of them were watchers, artists standing at the edge of the dance floor, capturing the fleeting moments of beauty and pain. Another poet, Claude McKay, a man whose soul was a battleground between love and anger, often found himself watching too. Here, he watches a dancer, seeing both her beauty and the cage her life had placed her in. reading of The Harlem Dancer by Claude McKay. Applauding youths laughed with young prostitutes and watched her perfect half-clothed body sway. Her voice was like the sound of blended flutes blown by black players upon a picnic day. She sang and danced on gracefully and calm, the light gauze hanging loose about her form. To me she seemed a proudly swaying palm, grown lovelier for passing through a storm. Upon her swarthy neck black shiny curls luxuriant fell, and tossing coins in praise, the wine-flushed bold-eyed boys and even the girls devoured her shape with eager, passionate gaze. But looking at her falsely smiling face, I knew herself was not in that strange place, that feeling of being present, yet apart, of watching the world with an artist's eyes. It was a feeling they all knew, but their observations were not always so melancholic. Sometimes the archives give us a glimpse into the simple, daily rhythm of their lives. We open a diary now, the pages are thin, the handwriting a graceful, looping cursive. It belongs to Alice Dunbar Nelson, a poet, an activist, a teacher, and a woman who loved both men and women. Her diary is not a grand performance, it is a quiet conversation with herself. Here she captures a simple, bustling day. Reading from the diary of Alice Dunbar Nelson, March 6, 1921. Arose late, a dull, grey morning. So much to do, mending, darning, a bit of washing. The house feels full of small tasks today, a mountain of domesticity to climb. Wrote a few letters in the afternoon, my pen scratching against the silence of the house. One to Bessie, a long, rambling thing full of gossip and complaints about the price of coal. Another to a publisher, more formal, more hopeful. One must always be hopeful. Took a walk before dusk. The air was damp, promising snow. The street was full of children, their shouts like the chirping of sparrows. It is a world of its own, this small community. One feels both a part of it and terribly alone within it. Came home to light the lamps and read. The quiet joy of a book, the feeling of its weight in my hands. Sometimes this is the only real society. An evening of quiet thoughts. I wonder what tomorrow will bring. Another mountain, I suppose. The quiet thoughts, the inner world. This is where the truest art is born. In the space between the world they observed and the world they dreamed of, and no one, perhaps, dreamed more beautifully, more decadently than our guide from the other night, Richard Bruce Nugent. He didn't just write stories, he wrote moods, feelings, streams of consciousness that are as much paintings as they are prose. We open now the fragile single issue of Fire. The pages are brittle, smelling of age and smoke. We turn to his legendary work, Smoke, Lilies and Jade. It is not a story to be understood, but a dream to drift upon. Let his words wash over you. Reading of selected passages from Smoke, Lilies and Jade by Richard Bruce Nugent. He was dreaming of a caravan of smoke, and the smoke was blue, deep blue smoke, and it was a song he had heard somewhere, a song of the desert, and the blue smoke caravan was winding its way through the desert of a song. He awoke. The room was dark, and the smoke from his cigarette filled the room with a pungent blue haze. Alex was not a musician, he was an artist, a writer of verses, and he was beautiful. Alex knew he was beautiful. His body was beautiful, a slim, flame-like body, all golden brown, and it was beautiful. He knew it, because he could feel its beauty. And he was an artist, so he could appreciate its beauty. He thought of Adrian. Adrian was beautiful too, a lovely, silver-skinned boy. Alex had kissed Adrian. He knew he would never love a woman, not as he loved beauty, and Adrian was beauty, and the kiss of Adrian was like the taste of lilies. lilies and jade. Let me see. What was it he wanted to say? Yes, he wanted to say that life was a thing of beauty, and that beauty was a thing of life, and that was all. But it was enough to lie here in the dark, with the blue smoke curling around him, and the memory of Adrian's kiss, like a cool green jewel on his lips. It was enough. The night was a velvet curtain, and the city was a distant hum, and he was alone, alone with his thoughts and his dreams, and the blue smoke caravan, winding its way through the desert of his soul. A cool green jewel, the beauty of a single perfect image, the courage to write it down, to give it to the world. That courage took many forms. Sometimes it was bold and declarative, like Bruce's prose. Other times it was quieter, more veiled, a stolen moment captured in a whisper. We turn the page in our archive to a poem by Angelina Weld Grimke, a poet of immense sensitivity whose work is filled with a deep, often unfulfilled longing. Here she describes a kiss. Reading of El Beso by Angelina Weld Grimke. Your mouth is a crushed flower at sunset. The sun, in leaving, has sealed his good night there, and I, who have seen, am envious of the sun. Ah, dear, your mouth is a crushed flower, envious of the sun. Such a simple, devastatingly beautiful line. It speaks of a love that must be observed from a distance, a love that feels as natural as the sunset, yet is not hers to claim. This was the reality for so many. They lived in a world of codes, of hidden meanings, of loves that could only be hinted at in art. The poet County Cullen was a master of this veiled language. He was a celebrated figure of the Renaissance, but his inner life was a constant, painful negotiation. He wrote this short, perfect poem, Tableau, which on the surface is about interracial friendship, but which for decades has been read by our community as a beautiful, defiant image of queer love made public. Reading of Tableau by County Cullen. Locked arm in arm they cross the way, the black boy and the white, the golden splendor of the day, the sable pride of night. From lowered blinds the dark folk stare, and hear the white folk talk, indignant that these two should dare in unison to walk. Oblivious to look and word they pass, and see no wonder that lightning, brilliant as a sword, should blaze the path of thunder. To blaze the path of thunder, to walk in unison, oblivious to the world, it is a beautiful ideal, but they were not always oblivious. The world had a way of making its judgments known, of leaving scars. The archives are not just filled with beauty, they are also filled with pain. They hold the memories of wounds. County Cullen, in another much more famous poem, captured the moment a single word could shatter a childhood. Reading of Incident by County Cullen. Once riding in old Baltimore, heart-filled, head-filled with glee, I saw a Baltimorean keep looking straight at me. Now I was 8 and very small, and he was no whit bigger. And so I smiled, but he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until December. Of all the things that happened there, that's all that I remember. That is all that I remember, the power of a single hateful word to eclipse everything else. The archives remind us that their world of art and jazz and love was not a bubble, it was a fortress they built in the middle of a hostile country, and their art was not just decorative, it was a weapon, a shield. It was the way they talked back, the way they insisted on their own humanity. Langston Hughes understood this better than anyone. His voice was the voice of the people, and he answered that small, hateful word from Baltimore with a quiet, unshakable declaration of his own belonging. Reading of I Too by Langston Hughes. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen. Then besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I, too, am America. I, too, am America. The simple, profound weight of those words. This was the constant struggle. To love a country that did not always love you back. To see its beauty and its cruelty with equal clarity. Claude McKay, who was born in Jamaica and whose spirit was always that of a fiery, proud outsider, captured this complex, painful love affair in a powerful sonnet. Reading of America by Claude McKay. Although she feeds me bread of bitterness and sinks into my throat her tiger's tooth, stealing my breath of life, I will confess I love this cultured hell that tests my youth. Her vigor flows like tides into my blood, giving me strength erect against her hate. Her bigness sweeps my being like a flood. Yet as a rebel fronts a king in state, I stand within her walls with not a shred of terror, malice, not a word of jeer. Darkly I gaze into the days ahead, and see her might and granite wonders there, beneath the touch of time's unerring hand, like priceless treasures sinking in the sand. A rebel fronts a king in state, that was the posture. A posture of defiance, of strength erect against the hate. This defiance wasn't always expressed in the high language of poetry. Sometimes it was shouted from a stage, growled into a microphone, set to a gut bucket blues rhythm. The archives of this era are not just paper, they are shellac. They are the grooves of old records. And in those grooves, we find the most direct, most unapologetic voices of all. The blues women. They didn't have time for veils or metaphors. They sang the truth. We pull a record from its sleeve now. The label is worn. It says, Ma Rainey. We can almost hear the crackle of the needle as it finds the groove. And then we hear the voice of the mother of the blues, laying it all on the line with a wink and a smile. Reading of the lyrics to Prove It On Me Blues by Ma Rainey. I went out last night with a crowd of my friends. They must have been women, because I don't like no men. It's true, I wear a collar and a tie, makes the wind blow all the while. 'Cause they say I do it, ain't nobody caught me, they sure got to prove it on me. Wear my clothes just like a fan. Talk to the gals just like any old man. 'Cause they say I do it, ain't nobody caught me, sure gotta prove it on me. They say I do it, ain't nobody caught me, I sure gotta prove it on me. I went out last night with a crowd of my friends. It must have been women, 'cause I don't like no men. They sure got to prove it on me, the sheer, glorious audacity. It is a declaration of independence, a joyful rebellion set to music. This was the strength of the community. They could find joy in the face of judgment. They could build families where there were none. They could hold each other up. And in the quiet moments, in the privacy of their diaries, we see the importance of these bonds. We return to the diary of Alice Dunbar Nelson. She is writing about her deep, complicated love for another woman, the activist Faye Jackson Robinson. Reading from the diary of Alice Dunbar Nelson, July 19th, 1921. Faye came today, a whirlwind of energy and ideas, as always. She fills the house with her laughter, and for a few hours, the grey dust of my own melancholy is swept away. We talked for hours of the movement, of books, of our own foolish hearts. There is a comfort with her that I find nowhere else, a shorthand of the soul. She sees the weariness behind my smile. I see the flicker of doubt behind her bravado. We sat in the parlour as the light faded, not speaking. The silence between us is never empty. It is filled with all the things that cannot be said. The world demands so much of us, So many masks, so many careful performances. With her, for a little while, I can lay the armor down. Her friendship is a quiet, steady harbor in a relentless storm. When she left, the house felt too large, too quiet again. The silence she left behind was not a peaceful one. It was the silence of absence, a quiet, steady harbor. That is what they were for each other. That is what this art, these words, were for them. They were a place to put the feelings that the world had no room for. They were a way of protecting the most fragile, most beautiful parts of themselves. Langston Hughes, in his gentle way, understood this better than anyone. He saw his role not just as a poet, but as a protector, a keeper of dreams. We open one last book of his poems. The page is worn as if read many times. Reading of The Dream Keeper by Langston Hughes. Bring me all of your dreams, you dreamers. Bring me all of your heart melodies, that I may wrap them in a blue cloud cloth away from the too rough fingers of the world. To wrap them in a blue cloud cloth. That is what we have tried to do tonight. To gently hold these dreams, these voices, these heart melodies, and protect them for a little while. The archives are quiet now. The books are back on their shelves. The voices are resting once more. But they are not gone. They are a part of us now. Their courage, their beauty, their pain, and their defiant joy are a legacy that lives within us. They are the quiet hum beneath the noisy music of our own lives. They remind us that we are part of a long, unbroken chain of dreamers, of rebels, of survivors. The light in our archive is fading. It is time for our own journey into the quiet land of dreams. Carry these voices with you. Let them be a gentle comfort, a reminder that you are not and have never been alone. Until our next journey into our shared past, this is The Sleeping Gay, encouraging you to remember that you are part of a beautiful, resilient legacy that stretches back through all of human history. Sweet dreams, beautiful gaze, and may your rest be filled with the soft, proud whispers of the voices from our archives. Good night.